welcome to our next session. My name is Sasha Vakulina. I'm Euronews business editor, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this Brussels Economic Forum conversation with our next guest, European Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni. Mr. Gentiloni is the Italian commissioner in the von der Leyen Commission, where he is in charge of the economy portfolio. In less than a year as European Commissioner, he has had to face an unprecedented number of challenges, probably more than some of his predecessors faced in their 5-year terms. And among, of course, some of the key tasks for the European Commission and Commissioner Gentiloni in particular have been the launch of the Green Deal, the suspension of the Stability and Growth Pact, the creation of the SURE instrument to protect workers, and, of course, the Recovery Package Agreement and the presentation of the next generation EU proposal. In our interview, we will be discussing these and other key issues for the future of the EU economy, including the role of the state, fiscal policy and the green transition. Now, let me remind our viewers that you can send your questions on Slido now or join the conversation in Twitter. Just enter sli.do in your browser and use the code #EUBEF20. Commissioner Gentiloni, thank you for being with us today at the Brussels Economic Forum.
Pleasure. Thank you. And indeed, what an extraordinary period we experienced.
Absolutely. And let me just follow up on something that's been closely linked to the debate that we've just heard and followed together here a bit earlier on the role of the state in the economy. In the 5 biggest European economies alone, and that is Germany, France, Britain, Italy and Spain, 45 million people had their wages partially covered by the state to keep them in jobs. Does this mean an expanded role for the state in the economy is inevitable and desirable after the coronavirus crisis?
Well, let me recall that Robert Lucas, the American Nobel Prize winning economist, said, I guess everyone is a Keynesian in foxhole. And by the way, he was not Keynesian. Back to your question, yes, my answer is definitely yes. The role of the expanded role of the state is first inevitable. Just think to the employment consequences. Figures that Eurostat delivered a few minutes ago are showing how strong the impact in employment is, despite the effort of all member states and despite this extraordinary new initiative proposed by the Commission that we call SURE. It is also desirable because if we want to reorient our economies towards the digital and green transition, we need a strong role for the state. But we have to add that it is also challenging because not only because obviously this expanded role should not come to replace the private sector, but also because the expanded state aid should not disrupt the level playing field in the single market. We have different strengths from different member states, and if we don't have rules on state aid, this could enhance the divergence inside the single market. And finally, very clearly, a stronger role of the state has nothing to do with models of authoritarian capitalism that we are looking outside the Union and sometimes with some temptation also inside the Union.
Gosia, the role of the state in the economy is also very closely linked to the ongoing discussions on the fiscal rules, of course, and the general escape clause and the economic governance review. What are the Commission's plans with the state aid flexibility and the general escape clause? How long will these remain in place? And should we rethink the way we approach debt?
Well, of course, we will go back to common rules. So both the temporary framework for state aid and the general escape clause are not forever. We have 2 important decisions to take. One is the timing, because it's absolutely crucial to avoid to go back to tightening rules too soon. We need to give our economy the necessary time, and this means that we need in 2021 to keep a positive fiscal stance in our economies. And second, what kind of rules? We were lucky because we were already having a review of our six-pack and two-pack regulations, and I think that this review, this discussion, would be very interesting to update the rules to the post-COVID situation.
And I want now to move to one of the top priorities of this Commission, which is, of course, the green and digital transition, and how this will be linked to the recovery plans of the Member States. Reaching the 2030 climate and energy targets will require additional investment of 260 billion euros a year by 2030. Decarbonizing Europe will cost 4.6 trillion euros. That is 18 times the cost of the Apollo program that put the first man on the moon.
Yes.
Are you confident we can reach that? What will be the role of the recovery instrument in that?
Yes, by the way, we could make another comparison, the recovery package and the Marshall Plan. In fact, the recovery package in the countries where you can have this comparison with the Marshall Plan is even bigger than the Marshall Plan. But in any case, I think that the task is very, very hard. But the European leadership is absolutely necessary. Who else? What other international political actor, apart from the European Union, could play a leadership role in the green transition? Nobody, to be honest, at least not in this moment. So we have to bring this task to its goals. And to do this, we need to coordinate all the national recovery and resilience plans to this priority. We are fixing a threshold of 37% of each national recovery plan dedicated to environmental and climate initiative, a very high threshold. And then we need to facilitate public investment. And here we are back to the fiscal rules. We will need, in our discussion on the new common fiscal rules, to find ways to facilitate public investment, especially for our twin transitions.
And the last but not least, before we go to the audience questions, I want to zoom in on the recovery package with you. We're still going to be below the 2019 GDP levels at the end of this year, and the rebound will be uneven, as you've said. What else can the EU and the Member States do to boost the recovery? Will the recovery package be enough? And are you satisfied with the agreement of the leaders?
Well, I'm quite satisfied. You are never fully satisfied because there are always things lacking. And I perfectly understand the European Parliament saying that on some goals the agreement was dismissive. But overall, I think it is an extraordinary agreement. And so our first task is implementation. I would say we are lucky to have the German presidency in this semester, because I'm sure that the German presidency will be very active and effective in helping this implementation. Politically, because we need the ratification of several parliaments, and also on the content, on the technicalities. A lot of work has to be done. And second, we need the quality of the recovery plans, because, well, the Commission is not a financial intermediary. We are not raising money in the markets and transferring this money to national governments. Of course, national governments have the ownership of the recovery and the resilience plans, but these plans should be coordinated with our common goals. And this is a really fascinating task for the Commission and for the Member States in the next few months. So implementation, quality of the programs, and then new initiatives, especially on own resources, and among these, the carbon border adjustment, which is, I think, a crucial mechanism if we are serious on this green transition.
Let's now go to the questions from the audience. Of course, I've got to remind you that as for the previous sessions, you can ask them via Slido using the code, and you can do it on Twitter with the hashtag EUBEF20. And some of the questions we're receiving, there is a recurring theme among all of them is the social impact of the crisis. A viewer asks if there should be an EU framework to guarantee an adequate minimum income and decent minimum wage. So this is one of the biggest concerns with the questions that we have been receiving during our conversation. What's your take on that?
Well, the social dimension was key in our first reaction. I just reminded SURE, and we are now ready with this SURE program, which is distributing 100 billion and on top of the national schemes. This is very clear if we compare the European situation to the US situation. Yes, we had consequences in our labor market, unemployment and especially employed people decreasing, but nothing comparable to what happened in America in the last weeks. This sure was a big effort, something we were discussing since 12 years, and that we decided in 2 months. And then we are working, especially my colleague Nicholas Schmidt is working on the minimum wage. We know it's not easy because of difficulties both in countries where the social situation is not advanced, and also, on the contrary, in countries where the social situation, the social welfare is very advanced. In both group of countries there is a sort of skepticism. But I think this is the right moment to try to have minimum wage in Europe.
Another question from the audience. One of our viewers, Boris, would like to know how the Commission can ensure that the national recovery plans are in line with the EU priorities. And how will you make sure the governments will implement reforms and not just cut taxes?
Well, we can be sure for the simple reason that we are the Commission, supposed to propose to the Council the implementation, the approval of these plans. The process means that we are discussing in the next month these plans with Member States and stressing the ownership of national governments and Parliament. But it will be a dialogue. At the end of this dialogue, beginning of next year, we will propose to the Council the approval of these plans. So here is our task and the possibility to respect our priorities.
I've got another question on taxes and taxation. This is something that seems to be a very important and interesting issue for our viewers and everybody who's following, of course, the Brussels Economic Forum live. On the role of the taxation and the way, what can it play in this transition? In particular, several people asked about how the role of digital taxation and green taxes is reaching the goals for the transition.
In general, I think it's very important, because if we are issuing a common debt, and if we establish that this common debt should be repaid from 2026 to 2056, 30 years, but the beginning of these 30 years is 5 or 6 years from now, how will we repay this? Will we ask again to Member States through their GNI to repay this debt? Or will we be able, with new own resources and also digital taxation and green taxation, to repay? I think that the first scenario is a failure for the Union, and the second one is the success. And so we are working very hard on own resources to obtain this success.
And the final question from the audience, because we have to unfortunately wrap it up. We could carry on. We've got so many questions, of course, from the viewers online. Our audience wants to hear more about how the Recovery Fund will support small and medium-sized company? That's, of course, a great question, given the fact that SMEs are definitely the backbone of the European economy. And some of them seem to be concerned about the cuts agreed by leaders to the Invest EU program, some of those businesses. What do you think about that?
Yes, indeed, it's one of the decisions that we are regretting as Commission, the fact that Invest EU was not strengthened as it should have been. But indeed, this window for small and medium enterprises remains in the Invest EU. And recently we added to this a strong recapitalization of the European Investment Bank that allows to the EIB programs with 200 billion euros in support to small and medium enterprises. So it's not perfect, but we have new tools also in this direction.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni, for this conversation, and thanks to everybody following us online and asking those questions. Thanks a lot for this conversation.
Thank you.